When I was about 18 years old, I decided to leave Mexico, my birth country, and come to India. The idea was to complete my higher education. However, 3 degrees, 4 jobs, and 14 years later, I'm still in the country. Perhaps the reason I stayed for so long is that I decided to listen to people who taught me to think in such a way as to comprehend that there are different ways of looking and understanding the world, and that my way of doing so is no better or worse than that of others. It's just different. When I told my family that I was planning to move to India, my sister's reaction was, "Where is that?" She went immediately to look for the globe and find where India was. My knowledge of the country was also very limited. It came from these two movies, Gandhi and A Little Princess. Gandhi taught me and gave me an insight into the independence movement of India. And A Little Princess narrated awe-inspiring stories from Indian mythology, from the perspective of a little girl who was talking to her friends in the boarding school. My parents weren't very happy either, given that the difference between Mexico and India is of 11 and a half hours. I couldn't have chosen a farther away country. But even if I hadn't heard anything about India before I decided to come to the country, as soon as people knew that I was coming to India, I started hearing so many things about the country. In a span of months, I heard more about India than in the entire 18 years of my life. People were like, "The traffic is very chaotic. The food is extremely spicy. There is a lot of poverty. There is terrorism." But there were also many positive things. I also heard people are very kind and welcoming. It is a booming economy. I was also bombarded by questions which I was not able to answer. Is arranged marriage a thing? What do Hindus believe in? Can you eat meat? The day finally came. My parents couldn't accompany me to the airport because my mother has just undergone a surgery a few days before my trip. I actually said goodbye to them in a hospital room. So the next day, early in the morning, a friend of mine accompanied me to the airport. Everything was new for me. I had never been outside of Mexico. I hadn't even been aboard a plane. Therefore, from check-in to crossing the boarding gate, everything was new. My first flight was very short, from Mexico City to Chicago, just 4 hours. But my next flight is the longest flight I have ever taken, 15 hours from Chicago to Delhi. I got a window seat, and beside me sat a very nice Indian gentleman who helped me to navigate my first culture shock. The flight attendant came to me and asked me, "Veg or non-veg?" What? She repeated the same question twice and was met by the same response. My roommate, the Indian gentleman, sensed the lack of patience of the flight attendant and came to my rescue. "She's asking you if you want to eat egg or bread and vegetables for breakfast." "Ah, I would like some egg." He translated back to the flight attendant, "Non-veg." Later on, I understood that mainly because of religious beliefs, people in India follow very strict vegetarian diets and other types of diets. And therefore, you will find a green or red dot in every food product, indicating whether it is veg or non-veg. But until that moment, veg and non-veg were not part of my vocabulary. After reaching Delhi and spending there a week, while having dinner with a friend who had been in Delhi for around 5 years, he asked me, "So, what is your impression of India?" I thought for a while. When I came to the country, I was expecting everyone to be wearing Gandhi caps, like in the Gandhi movie. But really, nobody was wearing them. I was expecting the traffic to be really chaotic, But coming from Mexico City, it wasn't that bad. I was expecting to see cows everywhere. But in the 1 week I spent there, I only saw one or two. So my answer was, I think India is quite a normal country. My friend's expression changed, and he told me, normal? If you use that kind of adjectives, it means that you are comparing countries. And you shouldn't compare countries. You should just accept that there are different realities. That is the best advice I have received until that moment, and perhaps the reason why I'm still in India. What is normal? Normal is what we are familiar with, what we are used to. And therefore, the opposite of normal is weird. For example, in Mexico, you are taught to brush your teeth after each meal, while in India, you are taught to do it as the first and last activity of the day. Is any of the two ways normal, weird, bad, good? It's just different. And therefore, I learned to change my mindset up from weird, normal, to equal or different, which has no negative connotation, as opposed to good or bad, or normal and weird. I learned to start asking how instead of where. Like, where do I find a normal broom with a long wooden stick? To, how do people clean their houses? From, where do I find a normal big supermarket with everything under one roof? To, how do people get their groceries over here? Thanks to that mindset change, I could stay for that long and stop seeing things as weird. In fact, if I had done this change earlier, I would have saved a lot of time and embarrassment. The number of times that I was sent from a stationery shop trying to buy balloons to a gift shop, or from a hardware shop trying to buy thermocol to a stationery, or from a grocery store intending to buy shampoo to a chemist. Even things as simple as counting can become a problem. 1, 2, 3. What are you doing? I'm counting. That's not how you count. 1, 2, 3. Actually, in the first 6 years that I stayed in the country, although I lived in Delhi, I didn't learn a single word of Hindi. For me, Hindi was the weirdest thing I had ever seen in my life. Some weirdly shaped lines that I could see in shops, in means of transportation. I had a mental block which didn't allow me to learn the language. But then I met some friends from abroad who were speaking and reading Hindi. And then I asked, how did you learn? How do you read? How does the language work? Now, instead of being weird, Hindi is for me a fascinating language, which besides has many similarities with Spanish, so much so that I use it in my Spanish classes. But something that I learned as well is that people knew as little about my culture as I knew about theirs. When I was in college and telling people that I was from Mexico, the reaction was similar to my sister's. Where is that? Some others insisted that Mexico was part of the US. Mexico is usually portrayed as a cactus wearing a hat. That is because the border between Mexico and the US is a desert, and it plays a very important role in Hollywood movies. But in fact, you would be surprised to know that Mexico has been ranked as the 5th most mega-diverse country in the world, having 10% of the world's species. India also ranks in that list at number 8. It sounds like a joke, but I learned a lot about Mexican stereotypes from airport security. As you can imagine, there is no lot of presence of Mexico in the country. And therefore, whenever I went to airport security with my boarding pass and my passport on hand, the security men were always very impressed. The first time I left the country, I was received by the security personnel with a Mexico, tacos and tequila. I was happy that this man knew something about my culture, but I was also a little sad that our diverse cuisine was reduced to bread wrapped around the first thing that you take out from the fridge. My second trip outside of India was around 2011. This time, I was also received by security personnel. Mexico. By this time he said, Chicharito. Just a year before, Chicharito had been signed by Manchester United and was playing quite well. And this person was clearly a football fan. However, 2015 came. And Narcos started streaming in Netflix and was quite a success. So much so that it was followed by Narcos Mexico. Can you imagine what was the reaction of security personnel next time I left the country? After putting my passport and boarding pass on the counter, the security personnel greeted me with the usual Mexico. But what came next left me speechless. Drug business? This is the airport. It's the one place where you have to be very careful with what you say, how you behave, or what do you carry. I thought I was being interrogated. Maybe I was a drug trafficker suspect. So I didn't say anything. I just pretended as if I hadn't heard a thing and waited for frisking to be over. But the security man wasn't happy. He insisted, and this time he said, "Is it true that most people in Mexico are into drug business?" I could breathe again. I was not a drug trafficker suspect. I could have an exchange with this man where I explained that I was a Spanish teacher and that in Mexico people had the most varied occupations. So I learned that we are all influenced by stereotypes in one way or another. Let's take a most recent example. On 9th of October, a Spanish newspaper published their Sunday supplement about economy, and their main story was about India. The summary of the story read, "The Asian subcontinent replaces China as the growing power, the hour of the Indian economy." And it was accompanied by a caricature of a snake charmer with a growing line graph going out of the cobra. 3 days later, this front page went viral. It was posted on Twitter and was received with many negative comments. For someone from outside India, from other culture, a snake charmer is quite a harmless representation. It is a man who, with a musical instrument, can calm down the most intimidating and dangerous of snakes. They don't know what we know in India, that it was spread by the British colonizers who exploited the snake charmers and took them around their colonies for shows. That it includes different levels of cruelty to animals. That it has been banned since the 70s. And that therefore, it is often associated with a painful past and undeveloped India. If the cartoonist had known this, he wouldn't have used that image to represent India. Perhaps a more neutral representation could have been used. Mexico has the cactus, China the dragon, Australia the kangaroo, India could have the elephant. But let's come back to Twitter. The reaction was very aggressive. When you read the comments on this post, you can sense hurtfulness that leads to anger, that leads to an eye-for-eye reaction. People started spreading and replying by using Spanish stereotypes to criticize Spanish culture and economy and the state of the economy in Spain. But can we change this around? What if instead of getting hurt and offended, we give the benefit of the doubt? Stereotypes and representations of our country can cause a sense of offense, which is quite natural and understandable. But we have to realize that people from other culture don't mean it like that. It's just that they lack knowledge. And therefore, we could change offense for opportunity. Stereotypes are an opportunity to portray our rich and varied culture, show to others what our culture really is like. So, do you want to enjoy your experience as a traveler, a student, or worker abroad? I recommend you to let go of the concept of normalcy. And no matter how offensive a comment may seem to you, turn it around and use it as an opportunity to understand where people come from and to explain where you come from. Who knows? You may spend 14 years in that country. Thank you.